The Daily Ticker with Dirt Sprague is poured by Pelican Brewing. Be ready for your next afternoon vacation with Beak Breaker Tropical. Pelican Brewing, born at the beach.
All right, Daily Ticker brought to you by Pelican Brewing. Visit pelicanbrewing.com for more details on locations, events, award-winning beers, independently brewed since 1996. Pelican Brewing, born at the beach. Let's talk some college football and potentially future NFL with our good friend, Andrew Nemec, recruiting insider right here on The Fan, at Andrew Nemec on Twitter, director of recruiting SBLive Sports. He was outstanding with Isaac and Suk last Thursday and Friday during the NFL draft. And I want to get to some of that 2025 stuff with you, Nemec, because the next year's class I find fascinating. Let's go to the portal, though, first. I'm seeing guys enter the portal from Oregon. It feels like a lot of that is a nudge. You had a big prediction. Safety, defensive lineman, what do we think is going to happen here in the next couple of days for the Ducks?
Yeah, it sure looks like that Oregon's going to land Peyton Woodyard, the transfer from Alabama. He is a true freshman. He graduated early, arrived at Alabama in January, actually just before their Rose Bowl loss to Michigan. He was the All-American Bowl's Man of the Year. He was the first junior ever to announce his commitment at the All-American Bowl 2 years ago. Gets to Alabama, Nick Saban leaves, and he likes this very, very specific defense. And in the transition from Saban to Kalen DeBoer, that defense is no longer in vogue in Tuscaloosa. However, it's what Dan Lanning is running. It's that quarters man match look, and it fits what they're doing in Eugene. So it just makes sense when that's so vital to what he wants to be and where he wants to be, that's going to be the fit. It's important to note he's an elite safety, a top 150 player. He was a 3-year starter at St. John Bosco that was a national power, won a national title for high school football in 2022. He's also the cousin of Kyle Hamilton, the superstar safety for the Baltimore Ravens. So Peyton Woodyard checks a lot of boxes. I will say this, too, completely separate from him ever going to Oregon, anything to do with that. I think he's the most polished, most interesting young man I've ever interviewed in my career. He's extremely bright. He's extremely thoughtful. He went out of his way to get back in touch with me if he missed a call right away. He was always Mr. Nemec this, Mr. Nemec that. Very thought-provoking answers. Sometimes he'd ask me things just to kind of bounce ideas off people. He is an incredible young man. There's a reason he was the Man of the Year. So Oregon will be very happy to have him both on and off the field. If, in fact, he chooses Oregon, I am very confident that's where he'll end up.
Well, Mr. Nemec, could you help me understand how you have viewed Dan Lanning's balance? Because we've talked a lot of Dion this week because he's put himself in the headlines, which is no shocking development. How has Dan Lanning balanced portal usage with what he's still doing on the high school level?
Well, I've always said Deion Sanders is actually Dan Lanning's best friend. Oregon was way up there in the number of roster departures and additions really in the first year that Dan Lanning was there. In fact, I think they were second or third in the entire country, only behind one of the schools being Colorado. So everybody's kind of focused on that and ignored that Oregon's had so much turnover. But you look at Oregon's roster, and I said this when Mario was there with Coach Salavea, they were so far behind in recruiting the front seven that it was embarrassing. I mean, they were terrible at recruiting front seven talent. Salavea on a stars per player average for his position was dead last of any position in the entire Pac-12. Oregon's D-line was that far behind the entire rest of the roster. So he's had to have a bunch of turnover. They've recruited D-line, and Dan Lanning's done it in an authentic enough and personal enough way, on the good side personal, that he hasn't burned any bridges. He's still beloved at every stop he's been at. The players who do leave don't seem to hate him for that. And he does seem to be very much above board in the way he's bringing guys in. So a lot of real positives for Dan Lanning, who very, very quickly went from we'll see what he can do as a head coach. He's really liked in Georgia to, I don't think anybody would argue, a top 5 program builder right now in college football, especially with some of the guys who have stepped away from the game.
Interesting. Andrew Nemec is our guest on the Pelican Brewing Daily Ticker. Anything else you expect? I know Derek Harmon, I'm seeing some of that stuff. I don't know where their scholarship numbers are at right now. I know that's kind of a slippery slope, and they've had some guys enter. Outside of Peyton Woodyard, do you think anything else is going on?
Yeah, I would definitely watch the defensive lineman from Michigan State. I think that is in play. I think that one's a little less certain than Woodyard. I think Woodyard's pretty much a slam dunk. I think Harmon is still kind of checking out some of his options. Oregon's in play. They are above the scholarship limit, so I think they'd have to lose 2 more. I think Ben Roberts and Colin Gill were the most recent guys to hit the portal, so they would have to have a couple more guys leave. And really, when we look at the difference, you mentioned Colorado's losing guys that they brought in within the last 6 months. The guys that Dan Lanning are losing are high school guys that potentially haven't had a big role, or guys that just haven't carved out a big role in general. They're not losing starters. They're not losing transfers that they just brought in January that suddenly enter the portal and go, this isn't a good fit. So that's another good sign that they're evaluating a high level.
Obviously, Oregon State, my beloved Beavers, lose their coaching staff to a certain degree, but one of them stays and becomes the coach. It's now become kind of an alumni-based coaching staff, a lot of experience with these guys in Corvallis. Obviously playing a Mountain West schedule as well in the Pac-2 conference with Washington State. What have we learned from Trent Bray and company? I know it's very early. It's still going to be year 1. What have we learned about the way they're recruiting and covering up a lot of the holes that they're going to miss from the guys who hit the portal?
I said this when Jonathan Smith took over, that I would give him a full recruiting cycle to really make any judgments. And you could actually tell, and this was a Jonathan Smith staple, that first weekend in June, he front-loaded a lot of his official visits. They don't use the spring game as much. Oregon State never has used the spring game as much as an Oregon does, because Oregon will showcase that with the fans and how big of an event that is. For Oregon State, it's a lot more lightly attended. They wait for that first weekend in June. So if Coach Bray is still doing that same thing, we'll get a pretty good feel for who his top targets are and who he thinks he could get with a big June, whatever that first weekend is, June, I don't know if it's 6th, 7th, 8th, somewhere around there. We'll get a pretty good feel for how he's recruiting. Right now, he has 1 commitment so far. It's the number 143 linebacker in the country. The young man had no other offers, but again, it was very early to get a commitment there. I think it's too early to say, but there hasn't been a tremendous amount of momentum. And unfortunately, like so many things, Oregon State right now, the women's basketball team kind of headed down a rough path with losing some transfers. I know, athletic director Scott Barnes was on with Primetime when I was there, and he said they won the portal, that they felt they added much more talent than they lost. And
I thought that was, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I heard that too, and I about fell out of my chair. Like, that really? We're going to sell that?
He's got to spin it how he wants to, and I respect him for that. And I respect him for coming on, and a lot of his answers actually, it was a great interview. That part left me scratching my head. And when I'm doing analysis on just how a guy recruits, I've got to look at that. And they lost DJU, they lost Aiden Childs, they lost Damian Martinez, Achille Arnold, Lisa Mascarenas, Silas Bolden. They lost a ton, and I don't know if their best transfer addition would crack the top 7 of the in and outs. I think they lost 7 players better than the best player they brought in. So right now they're working at a negative. And again, 1 commitment. I'll wait and see. Like I said, I'll wait and see a full cycle to see how Coach Bray does. He's obviously inheriting a really tough situation. But so far, if you're looking for that explosive momentum to start, I haven't seen it. That being said, again, June is usually big for Oregon State, so that's a big month to watch to see kind of where they're at. Okay,
it'll be interesting to see how it goes this summer. I do want to get in one quick NFL question before we let you go, Nemec. You're our draft guru around here. Again, you were great with Isaac and Suk last week. Way more. I remember Sprague and I doing a draft show years ago, and like 5 picks in, we're like, who the hell is this guy? Who the hell is this? A lot of that kind of going on.
That was the Deion Jordan draft.
It was a bad draft. In our defense, it was a bad draft.
This offensive lineman.
It was one of those like, I don't ever want to do that show show again. You were great at it. 2025, I'm seeing mocks that Shedeur Sanders is the number 1 overall pick, and I'm just saying if we have to deal with Caleb Williams' pink fingernails, we better be dealing with him bullying former teammates. What's Nemec's big board look like for 2025?
Well, it doesn't have Shedeur Sanders anywhere in the top 10. In fact, I wouldn't say he's anywhere in the top 15. I think that's silly. I think that DraftKings made him number 1 because he's a big name and people would throw money at that. But what I will say is this is a wide open year. I think Grant Nussmeier from LSU has a lot of tools and could really climb. He could be a guy you'd be looking at number 1. Carson Beck is a very good player. I don't know if he's got super elite traits, but a good player who I think is going to solidly stay in the first round discussion the entire time. Thematically, what we're seeing is this year set a record for 23 offensive players in the first 32 picks. We also didn't see the first defensive player come off the board till 15. The previous record was 8. Next year's the exact opposite. Next year is loaded with guys in the front 7. James Pierce out of Tennessee was something like 60-1 to be the number 1 player in the draft. PFF projects him actually as the number 1 player in the draft. Mason Graham is a defensive tackle out of Michigan. I don't think because he's a defensive tackle he'll go 1, but he almost certainly will go top 10. He's a very good player. Mikael Williams out of Georgia is another very good player. Kelvin Banks Jr., who sounds very familiar to Oregon fans, is potentially the number 1 pick as an offensive tackle out of Texas. He was actually at one point silently committed. I don't know if it was ever public. He was committed to Oregon and Mario Cristobal. When Cristobal left for Miami, it became kind of a Texas-Miami battle. He ended up at Texas. And Will Campbell, an offensive tackle out of LSU, another guy that both Banks and Campbell would probably slot in a 2-year draft just below Joe Alt, but definitely ahead of the J.C. Lathams, Amarius Mims, Talise Fuangas, those type of guys. So I think there's a batch of 6 or 7 quarterbacks that are all pretty good, but I think they're going to be sprinkled throughout round 1 and round 2. And then, oh boy, if you need an edge rusher or a defensive tackle, if you need a linebacker, some corners, next year's draft is the draft for you.
Interesting. Great stuff. Andrew Nemec, at Andrew Nemec on Twitter, Director of Recruiting, SBLive Sports, our recruiting guru here at 1080 The Fan. Thanks as always, Nemec. Know you're tired this morning. I know that pain well now, and I can relate to it. So go get some sleep, and let's catch up again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
There you go. Andrew Nemec. The Daily Ticker is brought to you by Pelican Brewing. Visit pelicanbrewing.com for more details on locations, events, award-winning beers, independently brewed since 1996. Pelican Brewing, born at the beach. Sounds like Oregon's not done. We'll see what they do over the weekend. Peyton Wood, your commitment might be imminent.